Josef Kramer, the Beast of Belsen. When British troops entered the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in Lower Saxony in the closing months of the war in April 1945, they were greeted by the officer who oversaw the camp that held upwards of 88,000 people. The Commandant Josef Kramer, a career Nazi who had served at various camps throughout Germany, was one of the worst criminals of the Third Reich. Those British soldiers were taken on a tour of the camp by Kramer, and there they saw scenes of unimaginable horror. Corpses left to rot, piled in mounds, while skeletal survivors of the Nazi abuses stalked the camp in search of food and water. Disease was rampant, with typhus killing as many as 300 inmates each day. Under Kramer's command, the SS had overseen a death camp at Belsen where thousands perished. The career Nazi, an only child born in Munich on November 10, 1906, to a middle-class family, Josef Kramer was raised as a strict Catholic by his civil servant father. The family moved from Munich to Augsburg in 1913, where he attended elementary school. He trained as an electrician, completing his apprenticeship before attending business school, where he completed 3 years of training as an accountant in a department store. He lost his first job after a few months when his employer let him go after suffering a difficult economic situation. For the next 9 years, Joseph was unemployed, except for the occasional work as a peddler. During this time, he lived with his parents, and when his father also lost his job due to the difficult economic crisis, the Kramer family fell into economic hardship. With little interest in politics, it came as a surprise when in December 1931, Kramer joined the Nazi Party, becoming member 753,597. He joined the SS the following year on June 20, 1932, and carried out voluntary work for the 29th SS Standard, 2nd SS Storm, stationed in Augsburg under the direction of Hans Loritz. When the Nazis came to power in January 1933, Kramer secured work in his hometown of Augsburg as a daily allowance employee at the tax office from October 1933 until his move to the Augsburg Registry Office in January 1934. There he was entrusted with compiling the vaccination list for the Augsburg City District Doctor. He also created a directory for birth, marriage, and death registers and church departures. The beginning of Kramer's association and service within the dreaded Nazi concentration camp system began in 1934 when he gained full-time employment with the SS Relief Organization in Dachau, one of the first concentration camps established to imprison the enemies of the new Nazi state. His service was requested by Hans Loritz, his former superior. For the first time, Kramer moved from his parents' home. During his time at the SS Hilfswerk, an institution that looked after National Socialists who had fled Austria, Kramer was employed as a clerk in the SS Paymaster's office. In this capacity, he would have been aware of the abuses, torture of inmates, and summary executions that were happening in the concentration camp. The SS camp official. From November 1934 to June 1936, Kramer worked as a clerk in the Commandant's office of the Esterwagen concentration camp, under the then camp commandant Loritz. When the Esterwagen camp was abandoned in 1936, he returned to Dachau, where, again under Loritz, he was employed as a clerk in the Commandant's office. He then served as adjutant at the Sachsenhausen concentration camp from June 1937 to August 1938, eventually rising to head of the post office. After that, he was transferred to Mauthausen in August, where he became an adjutant under the camp commandant Franz Zierreis. After the outbreak of war, he was sent to the Auschwitz concentration camp from May 1940 to November that year. At Auschwitz, the notorious death camp where hundreds of thousands were being gassed to death, Kramer saw his career improve further when, under the command of Commandant Rudolf Höss, he undertook and completed his training to become a protective custody camp leader. After this, he was sent to serve in that capacity at the Dachau concentration camp until April 1941. It was the role of the protective custody camp leader, or Schutzhaftlagerführer, to oversee the camp on behalf of the camp commandant. They were essentially in charge of the sprawling prisoner complex and were the commanders of the infamous Death's Head units, the SS guards who were entrusted with guarding and ensuring no prisoners escaped. Josef Kramer served as a protective custody camp leader in the Natzweiler-Struthof concentration camp in Alsace, initially until May 1942, and from February 1942 he worked as a provisional commander before being promoted to camp commander there in October 1942. Under Kramer's command, a gas chamber was installed at Natzweiler-Struthof for the purposes of killing those prisoners who underwent human experimentation at the hands of SS doctors. This measure was instigated by the German Ahnenerbe Research Association under its General Secretary Wolfram Sievers, who requested the use of the camp for specimens intended for the infamous skull and skeleton collection of the anatomy professor August Hirt at the Reich University of Strasbourg. For his services to the Reich, he was awarded the War Merit Cross Second Class. The gas chamber was completed on April 12, 1943, and several months later in August, 86 prisoners were transferred from the Auschwitz concentration camp under Kramer's order and gassed. The bodies were intended for use in Hirt's anatomy collection, and Kramer watched through a small window as the victims were suffocated to death. In May 1944, Kramer furthered his progression up the ranks when he succeeded Friedrich Hartjenstein as camp commandant in the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. Hartjenstein had himself been transferred to command Natzweiler-Struthof concentration camp. His appointment came at a time when the command structure at the Auschwitz camp complex was changed by order of Oswald Pohl, the head of the WVHA, the SS organization that controlled the camp system. As leader of the main camp at Auschwitz, Rudolf Höss was appointed to oversee the entire Auschwitz system, that comprised many other subcamps, work camps, and death camps. When German troops occupied Hungary in March 1944, SS Obersturmbannführer Adolf Eichmann went to Hungary to oversee the large-scale deportations of Jews to German death camps in occupied Poland. Under the leadership of Höss, who was responsible for training the camp commanders Richard Baer and Josef Kramer, who had just been appointed at the time, hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews that were sent to Auschwitz were gassed upon arrival. The gas chambers and crematoria were located in the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp and were overseen by SS Hauptscharführer Otto Moll, who was directly responsible for operating the machinery. Dr. Franz Lucas, who served as attending physician at the Auschwitz camp, testified as a defendant at the Frankfurt Auschwitz trial that he often tried to avoid any assignments given to him by Commandant Kramer by pleading stomach and intestinal disorders. Like the other doctors, Lucas was required to attend selections where prisoners were chosen for the gas chambers. These doctors literally had power over life and death. Once when Dr. Lucas saw that his name had been added to the list of selecting physicians for a large group of inmates transferred from Hungary, he objected strenuously to Kramer, who reacted by telling the doctor, "I know you are being investigated for favoring prisoners. I am now ordering you to go to the ramp, and if you fail to obey an order, I shall have you arrested on the spot." In his duty as camp commandant, Kramer was often seen during a selection in the infirmary of the women's camp, and according to the statement of Auschwitz survivor Olga Lengyel, who witnessed Kramer, shattered the skull of a female prisoner with a blow from a club while loading the victims onto the trucks. By the end of December 1944, the Auschwitz camp was merged with the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp under the direction of Richard Baer. Belsen, hell on earth. As such, Kramer was transferred to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp and took over the camp management there on December 2, 1944, where he succeeded the previous commandant, Adolf Höss. He arrived there along with some of his previous staff, including his deputy Franz Hössler, Chief Female Warden Elisabeth Volkenrath, and Irma Griso, one of the female SS guards who briefly counted Commandant Kramer as one of her many lovers at the camp. Kramer immediately began changing the way the camp was run. Under his leadership, Jewish prisoner self-government was abolished in the so-called Sternlager. This meant Jewish prisoners were now removed from specially protected jobs and replaced by non-Jewish prison functionaries, known as kapos, who immediately began a reign of terror against the Jewish population. As a result, the living conditions for the Jewish prisoners deteriorated due to reduced food rations and overcrowding in prisoner barracks. The conditions at Bergen-Belsen under Kramer's command descended into unimaginable horror. None of the many thousands of prisoners were safe from torture and abuse at the hands of sadistic SS guards, who were ordered by Kramer to keep the camp population under control by any means necessary. Many inmates were suffering from exhaustion and disease, such as typhus, which spread throughout the camp, claiming the lives of hundreds every day. As more and more camps were evacuated in the face of the Allied armies, the inmates were led on death marches to camps deeper inside German territory. Belsen soon became a transit camp, the destination for thousands of prisoners moved from other camps. By early 1945, the camp had become completely overcrowded, and the increasingly poor supply situation and epidemics caused mass deaths. The situation became so serious for the camp staff that even some of the SS guards contracted typhus. Although there were no gas chambers at Belsen, the rule of Kramer as Commandant became so harsh that he was nicknamed the Beast of Belsen by the inmates. By March 1945, the number of inmates had risen from 42,000 by another 28,000 as camps across Germany were evacuated. By the beginning of April 1945, discipline in the camp amongst the SS had fallen, and guards fearful of arrest or reprisals from the approaching Allies deserted their posts and fled. Kramer continued to manage the camp, but left the inmates largely to their own survival. Those guards who did remain were present when the British Army arrived. Liberation. On April 15, 1945, reconnaissance elements of the 11th Armored Division of the British Army arrived at Belsen. Representatives of the Wehrmacht in the area began negotiations to hand over control of the camp to the British. Once an agreement was signed, most of the SS were allowed to leave, and only a handful along with Kramer remained to maintain order. Shortly before the camp was liberated, Kramer ordered the SS to destroy the Commandant's files, thousands of paper records that listed camp inmates and their deaths. He also instructed the exhausted prisoners to attempt to clear away the thousands of corpses lying around the campgrounds. Although he was successful in the former, he failed at completing the latter, as the remains of thousands of inmates were scattered throughout the camp. Initially, Kramer tried to deny the British Army members access to the camp, fearing a possible riot by the inmates. This proved unsuccessful when they drove to the camp and informed the prisoners of their arrival. Shortly afterwards, some prisoners tried to break into the prisoners' kitchen and the potato cellar, causing the SS guards to fire at them. The British immediately stopped this, and then a British officer pointed his pistol at Kramer and forced him to carry an injured prisoner to the hospital. Kramer was placed under arrest, along with other members of the camp administration, which included the notorious female SS overseer Irma Gries, the SS camp doctor Fritz Klein, and the protective custody camp leader Franz Hussler. When British and Canadian troops entered the camp, they found thousands of emaciated inmates and as many as 13,000 unburied corpses. Kramer offered to give the liberators a tour of the camp, and the soldiers were shown piles of corpses that lay all over the camp, mass graves filled in, and the overcrowded huts with prisoners in every stage of emaciation and disease. Kramer was placed in shackles and sent for interrogation. Meanwhile, those SS who had been captured were put to work by the British, who forced them at gunpoint to carry the thousands of corpses for burial in mass graves. These men and women were made to carry out this grim task with no face masks or gloves. As a result, within 2 months, 17 staff members had died of typhus, and a further 3 others were shot and killed by British soldiers after trying to escape, and another committed suicide. Josef Kramer was sent to the Celle prisoner of war camp, before being briefly transferred to Diest in Belgium and then taken back to Celle. Interrogated by the British, Kramer gave information on the camp and crimes committed there willingly. He freely admitted carrying out the gassing of 86 Jews at the Natzweiler-Struthof concentration camp. The Belsen Trial. Imprisoned at the prison in Hamelin, Kramer and the other surviving camp staff were tried before a British military court at Lüneburg within the British occupation zone, where the Bergen-Belsen criminal case number 01 began on September 17, 1945. Of the 45 defendants, Kramer was the most senior representative. Among those tried alongside him were 16 male SS members, 16 female SS members, and 12 capos, or prisoner functionaries. Other than Kramer, the most high-profile defendants were Fritz Klein, who had been camp doctor at Belsen, Franz Hössler, who served as deputy camp commandant, and Elisabeth Volkenrath, who had been Oberaufseherin, or chief supervising wardress at Auschwitz before she came to Belsen. Most of those on trial had only recently arrived at Belsen, with some having been transferred as late as 2 days before liberation. The defendants were charged with crimes committed at both the Auschwitz and Belsen camps and concerned the ill treatment and causing the deaths of inmates. The trial lasted 54 days, and the international press was represented by over 100 reporters. Josef Kramer had become known as the Beast of Belsen, the nickname given to him by the British press. It was through the Belsen Trial that the world first learned of the horrors committed by the Nazis at the camp. All the defendants pleaded not guilty to the charges. Kramer testified in his own defense, denied any responsibility for what had happened at Auschwitz, and specifically any involvement in gas chamber selections, with which he claimed to have not been in agreement. Kramer concluded his testimony by insisting that he was innocent of all charges against him. He denied being a war criminal and claimed he was only a soldier and as such carried out the orders of my military superiors. However, former prisoner Anita Lasker testified that he had taken part in selections for the gas chamber at Auschwitz. Under the weight of the evidence found at Belsen, the court found 28 guilty of various crimes, and 11 of those were sentenced to death on November 17, 1945. Among the defendants facing the death penalty were Josef Kramer, Hössler, Dr. Klein, Irma Gracie, and 2 other female SS Aufseherinnen. The executions were carried out on December 13, 1945, at Hameln Prison by Albert Pierrepoint, assisted by Regimental Sergeant Major Richard Anthony O'Neill. After the executions of Volkenrath and Grease, Kramer was the third to face the hangman at 12:11 p.m. at the age of 39.